Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Marrero Psychology Toolbox. I'm Dr. Chris Marrero Howison, and today we're going to talk about 6 steps that you can take if you're worried about somebody. And this could be anybody from a partner, a friend, a coworker. These tips are general enough that you might be able to use them at any point in your life when you're really worried about somebody. Step number 1, trust your gut. Our intuitive sense is something that often happens when our brain is still trying to figure things out. So if you've been around somebody and you notice something is not quite the same about how they're acting or something is off, but you just can't put your finger on it, it's probably time to sit down with them and have a conversation about what's going on. All right, the next step, and this one may be a little bit scarier for most of you out there, is to ask about suicide. Now, I know this is a pretty taboo thing, and this is something that once upon a time when I was new to the mental health field, I really struggled with too. You know, we all have this idea of, well, I don't want to be wrong about this, or how embarrassing, or they might think that I'm making too big out of something. But let me tell you this, I have asked the question about suicide probably thousands of times at this point, and here is what I have found. First of all, thoughts of suicide are incredibly common. A lot of times people are really relieved that they can share it with you, and you might be surprised to hear about that, but often because of how our society feels about thoughts of suicide, people are worried that if they share it with somebody, they may burden them or overwhelm them. And if you open up the conversation and ask them directly, are you having thoughts of suicide? They're going to be relieved that somebody is willing to have a dark and scary conversation with them. It'll demonstrate that you care. Also, if they're not suicidal, it'll give them a chance to say, hey, I'm worried enough about you that I thought this might be the case. It's okay if it's not, and let's move on. All right, the next step. Be prepared to listen to them, whether they're having thoughts of suicide or not. If you're having this conversation because you're worried about the other person, make sure that you set aside your own biases, any potential judgment, and your own values. This is what the other person is struggling with right now. And later, after the conversation has happened, that's when you can get support yourself if you have some strong reactions about what they're talking about. So as much as you can when you sit down to talk to somebody, listen without judgment, be open, make eye contact, and encourage them to be honest about what's happening with them. All right, the next step, give practical help. Now, I want to talk a minute about what to do if they do say that they are suicidal versus other things that may be going on with them. So first of all, if they do say, if you ask, are you suicidal? And they say, yes, I'm having thoughts of suicide. At that point, because likely you're not a mental health professional, you've listened to what they had to say, the kind of practical help that you can provide at that point would be to stay with them and call a suicide hotline, get in touch with their counselor if they might have one, or even going with them or calling 911 as they go to the emergency room. All right, if they say, no, I'm not having thoughts of suicide, here are some other ideas that you might be able to take to give them support. So as we know that when people are really struggling with things, their ability to problem solve may be less than their normal time. So at this point, go ahead and problem solve with them. You know, maybe they're having trouble getting organized and they can't quite figure out how to get all of their meals in order. Think about what happens when somebody passes away. The first thing that often happens is somebody organizes a meal train. Now, there's a reason for that. Again, sometimes when we're overwhelmed with life, it can be really hard to get our basic needs met. So offer somebody a ride somewhere. Offer to babysit if you know they need a little bit of time to have some self-care. Cook them a meal, or just give them the gift of time. Say, hey, you know what? I'm here for you. Let me follow up with you every few days. Maybe we can go out for coffee once a week, or do you mind if I just check in with you? Next step, get them connected. So if you have heard a little bit about what's going on with them, why they're struggling in whatever way, it's a good time for you to sit down with that person and brainstorm some various resources that they could benefit from. So if you know they've been in counseling, this is a good time to say, hey, have you talked to your counselor about what's going on? Or perhaps they've never been in therapy before. This might be a good time to say, hey, have you thought about therapy? Or, you know, my therapist has been great. Have you thought about your own? if they don't want individual therapy, or perhaps they're already in it and they still need additional support, it may be a good time to start talking about support groups. Now, there are hundreds of support groups in most communities, and all you have to do is Google, search support groups in your area, and you'll find all sorts of things from Alcoholics Anonymous to grief groups to, groups for caretakers. And there's so many different kinds out there that, finding one that's a fit for the person that you're worried about is probably just a matter of a quick search. If the person you're worried about identifies in any way as religious or spiritual, one of the people that you may brainstorm for them is somebody within their religious or spiritual community that they trust, that they might be able to get some helpful advice or guidance from. Broadening their social support, looking for any mentors or people perhaps at work or clubs or any other organizations that they might be a part of, where they might be able to reach out and access some more additional support from people who may have an idea of what's going on for that person. And again, if people are, for whatever reason, are uncomfortable about reaching out in person, there are always online support options. And these range anywhere from, chat rooms and things like that, where you can go in anonymously and get support, to, interactive support groups, online resources where you can read articles and information. There's all sorts of things out there. Now, the one thing I do say is, as you're brainstorming, with a bit of caution, just make sure that if you're going online or anywhere else, that the source of support is a reputable source, sponsored by, NAMI or the, any of the Department of Mental Health or something like that, instead of, just a random person's site, because we want to make sure they get good, reliable support in these situations. And then, of course, lastly, there are thousands, maybe millions of self-help books and articles out there. Just do a search on Amazon or go to the library and look for any of the kinds of things that that person is struggling with. You could even offer to give them a ride, go together to the library. Any kind of resource that we can get for that individual to find support and to start moving forward is going to be really helpful. Last but not least, check in afterwards. And this is not at the same conversation, but this is at a agreed upon time, perhaps a few days or a few weeks in the future, where you just get back in touch with the person that you were worried about to check in to see how they're doing. Did they connect to the resources you had talked about? Do they need anything else? Just kind of closing the loop with what had happened, and to make sure that the person is kind of moving forward, and getting their life unstuck. Now, a brief word of caution too. I want to make sure, for all of you superheroes out there, this is not a time for you to wear the superhero cape and go above and beyond what the average person is able to do. So if you are not able to offer help in a particular way, say they need a ride to New York and you're in California, and you have a job, probably not a good time to offer that sort of thing. So as you're considering helping the other person, it's a good idea to think about what is reasonable for you in your situation and what is beyond what you're able to do. So check in afterwards, see how they're doing, and also make sure you take care of yourself too. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. I hope that you found this helpful. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or concerns, feel free to use the number listed here to call me directly, email me, or visit my website for more information. Take care of yourself.